Hey guys, and welcome back to Behind the Music. This is episode 6, and today we are looking at a relatively simple cover, Going to Pasalacqua, by Mason Dayot. No, by Green Day. And this is a really simple mix. Very simple, only because, it's a older Green Day song, so they weren't really into the production that much and more about, the music itself. So what do we got here? We just got a vocal track, we got guitar tracks, bass, and simple drums. Now, I didn't really copy the old style of how it was recorded back in the day. I hate to insult, but it sounded like shit before. Well, they were like a startup band, so they didn't really have the money. But with today's technology, we can achieve really great results. Anyway, I digress. So I did a little bit more of a modern recording, so I didn't really have a reference to go off of. If I do check my Magic AB, I think I just used Too Dumb to Die as a reference for the sounds of the song, the general balance, the bass levels and stuff like that. Okay, so this is pretty much the song, and we're just gonna go through it just like we usually do. Okay, so we'll start off with the drums. Okay, as usual. So the drum sounds. We got a little bit of a bigger sound. In the actual record, it sounds a little bit more distant, but for this song, it's sounding a lot more bigger. So if I were to just go to the drums here. So we'll just go through the drums itself. So the drums itself, okay, we have we go to our constructing kit, and what we got here? We got the CLA kick. We want to go for a nice big punchy sound, using the CLA snare drum this time, but we're using the Blackbird hi-hats. Like I said before in the last video, hi-hats tend to sound weird, especially on faster songs. So yeah, the Blackbird hi-hat really does sound perfect, even when it's playing fast. So it's really good there. So that's pretty much that. We go to the kick drum here. Just our pretty much standard processing as usual. Okay, we got a lot of the big, not too much of the big, because for faster songs you don't want to put too much low end or it starts to get really messy. We're also cutting out some of that sub low end that we don't need from the CLA kick that is already embedded into the sample. So we cut some of that out so it doesn't go too crazy. General rule for me is faster songs, you want to cut out more low end. Slower songs, you want to have a little bit more low end. So you could probably bring this down to like 30 or something like that. But other than that, pretty standard stuff. Okay, we actually cut out some of the low end again because we're trying to control the low end here, and we did our regular EQ, scooping that out to make it sound more scooped, more processed sound, and then adding some high end there, and then doing some compression as well. So if I were to just go and solo this kick real quick. So just giving it a bit of more of that modern polish. As usual, if I were to just look at the snare drum, so let's go to snare. Okay, what do we got this time? Okay, so this time we have, just our standard saturation with the FG73. We're pushing it again with the Brit K4E. We're cutting out some of the low end again because it's a faster song, of course. And we're adding the low end, adding the top end. We're not adding too much though, because remember, a faster song, it's gonna sound weird if you put too much. Usually what I tend to do for a snare drum to get the low end right is I'll listen to the using my software here. We'll be using it to, I'll check it on the NS10 preset. And with this NS10 preset, I'll be able to see how the low end sounds on the actual reference track, if in this case, Too Dumb to Die. Or if I would use, if it sounds weird, if it sounds like that, so if I get a certain sound and it sounds a certain way on the Japanese white speakers, the NS10s, with my song, and then I switch it to Too Dumb to Die and it sounds like that, then, it's going to sound... It sounds right because obviously it's a professional mixer. So if it sounds good on the NS10s with the reference mix with Too Dumb to Die, then it's going to sound good, for my mix, all right, if it sounds similar. That is a guideline, of course. You don't want to do exactly the same thing, but, people are lazy. So hi-hat, a lot of this hi-hat's played pretty heavily on the song. Almost exclusively. So we're cutting out a lot of that low end because it is a chunky sounding hi-hat, and also cutting out some of that ugly mid-range that I found in there, and also adding some brightness because again it is a chunky a pretty chunky hi-hat, so got rid of that. Toms, a variety of different things. I just used the rack toms preset this time because it doesn't focus that much on that sub low end as the what am I trying to say, as the floor tom preset would. So what I did for this, I just adjusted it and found the resonant frequencies, and and just adjusted it to taste, and also the scooping, and also regular stuff, adding some thickness, because the playing a little bit of the higher toms, it sounds a little bit weird, just not having that low end that you think you have. It sounds too thin, so we're using the adding harmonics with the revival to add that low end in there. Okay. Overheads. What do we do for the overheads? As usual, just our standard stuff, but this time I added some compression. So if I were to add if I were to just solo the overhead without it, this is how the overheads sound. Of course, it's a CLA recorded sample kit, so it does sound fantastic. So what are we doing here? We're cutting out the sub low ends, adding more alone with the special curves, adding the present to make the shells pop out, because remember the overheads are the sound of the drums, and we're adding this compression here, but turning down the mix knob. And we're gonna see what this compression is actually doing. So let's take a listen to that. What it officially does is it adds a little bit more snap to the snare drum. You could hear a little bit more of a tightness being kind of pulled together with the compression. Again, it's a medium attack, medium release. It's not that much really going on, and we're turning down the mix knob to taste, because then it starts to sound a little bit washy if you start compressing too much. Room mics, very natural sound, I believe, for this one. No. We went for a big sound. So let's listen to the rooms. So if I mute the room mics, you're gonna hear the space kind of disappear. And what this room mic is essentially doing is adding more vibe, essentially, and more energy to the drum kit in a very subtle way. So I'll turn off the room mic. Oh, you can't really see it because it was in the artist mix, but I'll turn off. You can see it's muted there. I'll turn it off, and I'll turn it on. You're gonna see how it sounds. See how the life of the snare drum kind of just, brings everything to life with the room mics. So that's why it's always important to have the room mics, but don't do it too much unless you're going for that specific sound of a big roomy, very rock ballady kind of song. But for this song, it's, we're just trying to, I didn't really have a guideline, so I just kind of went with my gut feeling. And I just, I wanted to give it more ambience, but I didn't want to give it too much ambience. Let's take a look at the bass now. Pretty much, I kind of cheated on this one. Aside from the standard, compression and, cutting out the ugly ass frequencies and adding some mid-range there to give it some pop, I used the CLA bass this time. And the CLA bass, just made it work. And, using the sub is really good for, I always tend to go toward using the CLA bass plainly because of the sub, which is a version or an alteration of the Max Bass plugin by Waves. And this pretty much, it gives you subharmonics that will let you hear it on a smaller system. And I use this in conjunction with the Sonarworks when I'm using the Japanese white preset, which is, I guess, a shitty speaker NS10, right? So that's where it comes from. The treble, the honk, it's like the frequencies that were chosen for this plugin is just really good. That's why I really love the Chris Lord Algae artist series, because it just works, and has a very wonderful distortion that just sounds beautiful, which is why I like to use it on the fuzz channel, where I'll take a lot of the bass, because the bass is being served with the bass track, and then the side chain, the fuzz track is just just giving that distortion, which is where we get this awesome bass sound. If I were to solo both. So it sounds really, really good. You get a nice beefy sound. Now, the guitars. I went for my own kind of sound. I kind of started with a preset from a Dookie era kind of guitar amp, and then I just worked it out by moving the mics around and stuff like that. And this is the sound we got instead of that weird water bottle sound from the original record. Not to insult, it's just objectively, especially as an engineer, you can't really let these things get past you. So let's take a listen to the guitars in the new production. So what did we do? Okay, so it was sounding a little bit scooped, so we added more 600 as usual. We're adding that mid-range. We added some more low end to give that beef, especially for just raunching guitars that just keep going and going. It's nice to give them some body, or they start to sound too thin. Now this is kind of a weird philosophy, as you know. Through all my videos, I'm always adding tons of low end to guitars, which is, if you read any mixing book or you go to any tutorial, they're gonna say cut out the low end in the guitars. You don't need it. It's the bass. I used to believe in that too, but fuck, it just works. It just works. So just try it. No one's gonna die. No one's gonna die by EQing something. Anyway, so we also cut out some of the high end because it was sounding a little bit too fizzy. So we're using a nice shallow curve with the custom series equalizer, which is my favorite EQ, by the way. Everything just sounds so musical and so awesome with it. Also, a lot of the beat comes from the VTM just itself with the VTM. Just being on there gives it that nice saturation. I think I put it on a low bypass. Did I put it on low bias? And the low bias gives it some more beef. So if I were to just bypass this and unbypass it, you're going to see the difference when the tape machine is off and on. So yeah, the warmth, it just became a lot warmer and a lot more pleasant sounding and less digital sounding. That's kind of ironic since it is not ironic. I felt like that was like a plug. Anyway, C4, as usual. So this song had palm muting. So the only reason I would use the C4 to control the low end rumble, which is kind of ironic, is because there's palm muting in this song. And whenever there's palm muting, you're going to get a lot of that build up. So if I could find I think this is a palm muting part. It looks like one. And you're going to see how the C4 is controlling the low end of these guitar tracks, even though I added low end, which is pretty much for that part where they're just strumming regular chords, and this part pretty much just comes into play during those palm muting parts. So we're gonna see what it does. See how the low end it started to rumble a bit, and if you're listening on headphones, it starts to build up in your left ear or something like that. The C4 just kind of controls that just a little bit. You don't want to take out too much, because if you try and compensate for those parts of the palm mute too much, then the parts of the chords are also going to be affected in the regular notes, so it's going to start sounding thin. So you got to find that nice healthy balance whenever you're using, guitars don't really like a lot of processing, so every move you got to make is very, very subtle. Except with the custom series. The custom series, they kind of have weird curves, so everything just seems to work when you boost the fuck out of them, and that's why I like them. But if you see here, if I'm using SSL, you only put in 5 dB. That's actually quite a lot, actually. But I think the original sound was kind of very, very dull. Anyway, so last thing here is the Vox, the vocals. So this is particularly hard to sing. There's no auto-tune at all on these vocals. I'm quite proud of myself, especially on these higher parts here. So let's take a listen to the vocal track by itself.
What doesn't turn all night thinking of your ways of affection, but to find that it's not different at all. We'll throw away my past mistakes and contemplate my future. That's when I say, what doesn't turn all night thinking of your ways of affection, but to find that it's not different at all. Well, I throw away my past mistakes and contemplate my future.
So we just, it's our basic, vocal sound, nice compressed sound, a less modern, more like American Idiot kind of sound, where the vocals just sound nice and compressed. Especially with a Billy Joel's kind of vocal style, he already sounds compressed when he's singing, so this just adds more to that. So what are we doing? We just have a regular, VTM on it. VMR, what do we have this time? What do we have this time? So, generic, FG73, adding some thickness. I used the virtual mix bus because I started from the vintage vocal preset, so that's where this comes from. Adding that low end because it sounds too thin. Adding more low end with the custom. Again, with these custom series EQs, they're so fucking musical no matter what the fuck you do. So it's just really to taste. You can't really go wrong with these fucking things. So they're awesome. Then using the FGN, which is a very, very powerful EQ. Just adding a little bit of dB is going to give it that. So we added some bite. Added a little bit more bite because it was sounding a little bit thin. And also cutting out some of the low end, some of the high end as well. I believe this is just a preset. But I kind of just work with whatever is given to me, and then I adjust it from there with the custom series. I treat it as its own kind of sound. This time we didn't use the regular vintage. Oh, now you're gonna see my next cover. Anyway, we didn't really use our vintage blue stripes, which you usually use. Because we know we're going to be using compression in the next stage, which is the CLA vocals plugin. Because I don't know, I think it's just the version of the CLA Blue or something that they use on this, and it just sounds fucking fantastic. And I like adding the top end as well with the CLA plugin. As soon as you put this thing on, the vocal just sounds fucking amazing. So if I were to just turn up the CLA vocal right now.
What doesn't turn all night thinking of your ways of affection?
Sounds fine. Let's add it in.
What doesn't turn all night thinking of your ways of affection, but to find that it's not different at all.
Yes, sir. And then our standard C4 doing its job there. So that's pretty much it. The automation. Let's talk about the automation for a second. So I did a lot of automation on the slaps to make sure they're not too wet, and they're wet enough when I want them to be. Especially on verses, you kind of want to cut them down. Choruses, you can bring them up because there's a lot more going on. So you'll tend to have that as well. Now, most of the dynamic comes, I didn't really do any of the drums this time. The dynamic comes from the guitars. And you can see the guitars, they have a nice steady flow. And they gradually change as the choruses come in and they go down during palm mute parts, especially to let space for the bass. So if I were to just go to, I think this part here. So the reason I brought this down is so that the bass can have its little solo here. So you can hear this little bass solo here. So you gotta make some space for it and make it very subtle. You probably don't even really notice the guitars going down that much. Because that's just how automation is. You kind of want to make it subtle. I guess it's artistic. It's an artistic thing, but you can make it subtle. You can make it drastic. And for this song, I tried to make it as subtle as possible because it is pretty much a flat kind of song. So not really as dynamic as the newer productions. And of course, lastly, we have our mix bus, and the mix bus, has automation on the choruses to go up. Especially in the last section here, which is where the big finish. So the big finish usually has a lot going on there. In particular, I don't think I really have anything going on. It's just the regular standard stuff that you guys are used to. Okay, so good. 20 minutes. All right, guys. So this was Going to Pasalacqua by Green Day, and this was a little bit of a modern cover. And as usual, you will be able to get the stems. Please like, subscribe, keep the series going. I do make these videos for, I literally make these videos for the audio engineer people, fans, the people who watch like my vocal writer video or something. I literally make these for you so you can practice your stems and all that too. And then I make the music videos for the Green Day fans as well. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some insight. I hope you learned a little bit of something about, especially with automation and making room for things, and also learning to just break the fucking rules. If you do know the basics of mixing, you'll learn a lot about cutting EQ and stuff like that. And once you understand that, learn to harness it, yes, and then learn to break those rules. And that's something I've been doing a lot lately. And just going with my gut feeling. I mixed this song in about like an hour or something like that. And the faster you do it, the less you're overthinking things and you just go with your instinct. And then, you know, always make sure you have a nice reference plugin to get you back into an object, get you back to objective thinking, say, because you could get into the mix a lot and you could start adding, you know, a lot of low end, and then you take a listen to a commercial track and you have way more low end than that track, and then you got to make the adjustments and go backwards again. So just make sure you're always keeping perspective, make sure you take breaks, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Just make sure if you do play the dangerous game that I do of mixing, that you have a little reference track for you to go back on. Okay, guys, so thanks for watching. Make sure you leave a comment, subscribe. If you have any questions, just go ahead and shoot me a holler, whatever, and get ready for the next cover, which is coming out next week. And I'm going to be moving this week, so you're going to be seeing some probably new scenery from now on. Anyway, guys, so thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hooray!